Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we are unpacking an absolutely massive, just totally fascinating thousand-year sweep of history on the Indian subcontinent. We're going to look at the arrival of Islamic empires in India, but we're framing it as a dramatic, character-driven story. This isn't just some boring timeline of who ruled what and when. It's a deeply complex narrative full of conflict, conquest, and ultimately, some of the most beautiful cultural synthesis the world has literally ever seen.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've organized this immense span of history into 6 clear chapters. 1, the conquest of Sindh. 2, the Delhi Sultanate emerges. 3, a new cultural synthesis. 4, Babur and the Mughal dawn. 5, the golden zenith. And finally, 6, Aurangzeb and the fracture.
Chapter 1, the conquest of Sindh, the arrival of Islamic powers in the Indian subcontinent. Let's move to and see how this builds, because these initial conquests mark the earliest encounters between Islamic and Indian powers. As Islam expanded super rapidly across the globe in the 7th century, the Indian subcontinent felt that shift almost immediately. We see early Arab naval expeditions targeting India as far back as 636 AD. But the real monumental shift on land, that happens in 712 AD, when an army of the Umayyad Caliphate successfully conquers the region of Sindh, which is in modern-day Pakistan. This was the first time Muslims held political power over a traditionally Indian population. But, and here's a really important nuance from the sources, it wasn't purely about conflict. Arab traders were welcomed in Indian ports, Indian ships were totally common in Muslim ports, and local rulers frequently allowed Muslim communities to settle down and build mosques. So you fast forward a few centuries, and this really complex blend of trade, tolerance, and territorial ambition paves the way for 1206 AD and the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate. Chapter 2, the Delhi Sultanate emerges. Turkic and Afghan rulers establish new administrative systems. Now, India had faced invaders from Central Asia for millennia, but the arrival of Turkic and Afghan rulers in the 13th century was a real game changer. Why? Well, because unlike previous conquerors, they retained their distinct Islamic identity while simultaneously building completely brand new legal and administrative systems right there in India. These systems challenged and often entirely superseded the existing codes of social conduct. For the next 300 years, the Delhi Sultanate saw 5 separate dynasties wield power from their capital in Delhi. First, you had the Mamluks, established by a former slave in 1206, who miraculously managed to secure northern India while fighting off these terrifying Mongol raids. They were followed by the Khalji dynasty, who pushed the borders way down, deep into the south. Then came the Tughlaqs, who had to deal with intense economic collapses and famines, which led into the much weaker Sayyid dynasty. And finally, the Lodi dynasty from Afghanistan. We're moving fast here, but this massive political progression really laid the groundwork for everything that followed. Chapter 3, a new cultural synthesis, the fusion of Hindu and Islamic traditions. Let's hit the brakes for a second, because underneath the endless march of changing dynasties, something profoundly beautiful was happening at the ground level. A deeply mixed culture was blooming, one that was remarkably different from ancient Indian culture. A perfect everyday example of this fusion is language. Persian was established as the official court language by these Turkic and Afghan rulers. But as it interacted with the everyday vernaculars of North India, a completely new language emerged, Hindustani. The legendary 13th century poet Amir Khusro utilized this blend, which he actually called Hindavi, in his writings. Today, this synthesis lives on in modern-day Hindi and Urdu. It's a language still spoken by millions and millions of people. It became the absolute lingua franca of the period. And this brilliantly illustrates how that cultural synthesis extended right into the physical world. Central Asian conquerors brought in these grand Persian and Islamic architectural concepts, but they didn't bring entire workforces with them. Instead, they employed native Indian craftsmen, architects, and sculptors. These local builders applied their own traditional Indian construction styles to these foreign concepts. The results? A stunning, blended aesthetic that was neither purely Islamic nor purely Hindu. Indo-Islamic architecture took the absolute best elements of both to create something entirely unique to the subcontinent. Chapter 4, Babur and the Mughal dawn. A new empire sweeps in from Central Asia. By the 16th century, the Delhi Sultanate was fracturing. It was falling apart. And in 1526, an ambitious conqueror named Babur, who actually claimed descent from both Genghis Khan and Timur, swept in from Afghanistan. He defeated the final Lodi Sultan at the Battle of Panipat and firmly planted the roots of the Mughal Empire in northern India, blending that Turk-Mongol warrior culture with Persian administration. Babur was just a fascinating figure. He was a brilliant, fierce warrior, but also this highly literate scholar who meticulously recorded his impressions of his new empire. As our sources note, he was fond of its landscape and marveled at its plants and animals, but he showed little interest in the Indians themselves. He effectively isolated himself. He built these walled gardens and palaces that acted as little enclaves of Persian culture, barely interacting with the native population at all. But, as we'll see, that isolation definitely wouldn't last in the generations to come.
Chapter 5, The Golden Zenith, Reaching the Heights of Tolerance and Architectural Majesty. Under Babur's grandson, Akbar the Great, the Mughal Empire reached stunning new heights. We're talking administrative organization, amazing religious tolerance, and an absolute cultural flourishing. All of this prosperity funded jaw-dropping architectural achievements by his descendants. Most notably, Emperor Shah Jahan, who gave us the ultimate symbol of Mughal majesty, the Taj Mahal. Built as a sweeping, just monumental tribute to honor his late wife, it required an almost unfathomable amount of imperial resources, years of dedicated backbreaking labor, and thousands upon thousands of specialized workers. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the specific date, 1643. That was the year Shah Jahan finally held the very first memorial service at the Taj Mahal, on the 12th anniversary of his wife's death. Just think about that scale for a second. Even by 1643, only parts of the structure were ready for service. It would take another 10 full years to finish the entire complex. It remains, for sure, an iconic symbol of India's past glory. Chapter 6, Aurangzeb and the Fracture, Reversing Policies and Sparking Widespread Rebellion. Well, as they say, empires rise and empires fall. The immense strengths of the Mughal Empire, its centralized administration, and its careful integration of super diverse populations soon became its greatest vulnerabilities. To understand this fracture, we have to neutrally look at the stark contrast in leadership styles outlined in our sources. Over a century prior, Akbar the Great had famously abolished the jizya tax on non-Muslims in 1564. He actively hosted open religious debates with Hindus, Muslims, Jains, and Christians, literally using tolerance as a tool for political unity. But Emperor Aurangzeb in the late 17th century, he took a completely different hardline approach. He reinstated the jizya tax and even established an Islamic morality police known as the Muftasibs. These reverse policies deeply alienated his subjects and sparked widespread financially draining uprisings across the subcontinent. So the crucial point is that these internal pressures rapidly shattered the empire in a massive cascading effect. In 1674, Shivaji carved out his own kingdom in the Deccan and declared the Maratha Empire. Further north, fierce Sikh rebellions ignited, politically awakened by Aurangzeb's execution of their ninth guru, Teg Bahadur. And as that internal rot set in, external predators started circling. The Mughals suffered a humiliating defeat and the absolute pillage of Delhi by the Persian Nadir Shah in 1739. Then, in 1752, came an even more devastating sack of Delhi by the Afghan Duranis. The once mighty Mughals were basically reduced to mere figureheads, sitting in a shattered city. And that leaves us with a truly dramatic cliffhanger. With the Mughal central authority functionally destroyed, and the Maratha Confederacy violently sleeping out of the Deccan to claim the territory as the new dominant power, who is going to ultimately seize the jewel of India? Because right as this internal chaos was peaking, new ships were quietly appearing in the ports of Western India, carrying heavily armed strangers from Europe. But the rise of the British East India Company? Well, that's an explainer for another day. Thanks so much for joining me on this incredible journey through 1,000 years of history.